Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
It's known as the People's University, and now there is a significant increase in tuition coming for students. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. The California State University Board of Trustees this afternoon unanimously approved a 6% increase in tuition over 5 years. And KPBS education reporter MG Perez has more on what that means.
On the campus of San Diego State University, students were well aware of what was happening up the coast in Long Beach. The Cal State Board of Trustees continued its debate on raising tuition for the first time in about a dozen years.
I'm lucky enough to have parents that cover a lot of my tuition. But it's just an unnecessary cost. I want to see where my money's going.
The university's trustees wrangled with options to make up for a $1.5 billion deficit. That's not a simple fix when the only funding comes from the state and the tuition charged to students.
It is shocking that we have created a culture where people don't expect tuition to be raised. People have not seen it for 11 years. And so somewhere along the way, we gave people the impression that this system is magically going to create money to sustain itself.
They have approved a 6% increase in tuition every year over 5 years at the 23 campuses across the state. Here at SDSU, sophomore Ariana Garcia is disappointed the price hike could wreck her budget plans after graduation.
All the other schools I applied to, while they were great, they were out of the price range, and with the, being able to go here, I don't have any student debt, thank goodness.
That could change for her and other students who will be charged an extra $342 starting next school year. By the end of the 5-year increase, the total would be almost $2,000 extra per semester. In their discussion today, trustees committed to offset the increase with other financial support for students who need it most.
We have close to $2.5 billion, and that will grow in financial aid. And we have a commitment to use that tool very much to not face the dire consequences of declining enrollment.
I feel like I'm sort of getting gypped already. It's an insane amount of money to pay. And I've got a lot of friends in Europe, and they're all, going to school for free, and I'm here paying a whole lot of money.
That whole lot of money will start in the fall of the 2024-25 school year. Trustees have committed to reassess tuition costs every year, considering any changes to the economy or state funding, for better or worse. MG Perez, KPBS News.
The state legislature may be voting this week to phase in a $25 per hour minimum wage for healthcare workers, but those efforts aren't stopping the Chula Vista City Council from looking at it themselves. KPBS health reporter Matt Hoffman has more.
Discussion of a draft ordinance to bring a $25 minimum wage for healthcare workers packed Chula Vista City Hall Tuesday. Some healthcare workers say that base pay would be life-changing.
I work another 25 hours doing a second job just to be able to make ends meet. It's really hard to be able to live here in Chula Vista as a single parent. I've lived in my car.
They call us heroes, or heroes works here, but we're just laugh about it. What's becoming a hero? They're not giving us anything.
And I live in low-income housing. I just applied for food stamps.
Opponents say the increase in pay could have some unintended consequences.
So if approved, this ordinance will negatively impact health care programs and services that this community needs and deserves.
The board chair of Sharp's Chula Vista Medical Center says the hospital has been operating at a significant loss for the last 5 years. She predicts this year losses will exceed $70 million.
In the absence of additional revenues, we will be faced with some difficult decisions, including program reductions and service closures.
The proposed ordinance in Chula Vista would increase base pay for healthcare workers to $25 an hour starting in January, while Senate Bill 525 would phase it in. And some health facilities would have more time than others. For hospitals with a high government payer mix, current revisions wouldn't see a $25 per hour base pay until 2033.
One of the things about that state proposal that to us makes more sense is the idea of some kind of phasing in plan. We're still not sure how it will be funded or how it will be paid for. There is no real plan for that.
In its latest version, SB 525 states that proposed city ordinances or ballot initiatives for health worker minimum wages like this one in Chula Vista would be nullified if the bill passes. But that's not deterring supporters.
And I'm just going to point out that I think it's comical that we have CEOs sitting behind us that make millions of dollars and workers that make as low as $17 an hour fighting to make ends meet.
The Hospital Association of San Diego and Imperial Counties estimates that the $25 per hour base pay would increase annual expenses by $20 million for Chula Vista facilities.
And I've yet to hear one healthcare speaker come up here and say, we don't want to pay our employees of what they deserve. But it's got to be thoughtful and well thought out.
Hospitals and clinics are calling for an economic impact study to be done. Ultimately, a majority of council members agreed to move the item forward for a hearing next week, knowing that if SB 525 were to pass in its current state and be signed into law, this proposal would be moot. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
Emergency child care funds from the pandemic will expire this month. If nothing is done, centers could shut down and thousands of kids could be left without care. KPBS reporter Tanya Thorne says elected leaders are acting quickly to prevent this from happening.
$24 billion in federal emergency funding helped keep the child care industry from collapsing during the pandemic. If those funds run out, it could push providers, parents, and more than 3 million kids towards a child care cliff.
We know in San Diego, it's already incredibly hard to find and afford childcare. If we don't extend this funding, it's going to get even more difficult.
Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs says around 80,000 kids and 13,000 programs in California would be impacted. So she's pushing for child care funding at the federal level.
I'm really proud to co-lead the Child Care Stabilization Act, which would fund child care stabilization grants at $16 billion every year for the next 5 years and make sure that we are at least staying at the level of child care we have now.
The legislation is proposed by a group of Democratic lawmakers in the Senate and Congress. Jacobs says child care hasn't been a priority.
It makes no sense that my colleagues are refusing to come to the table and talk to us about this because it is fiscally responsible. It's good for families. It's good for our workforce. It's good for our small businesses.
She says that for every dollar invested into the child care system, the federal government saves $6 in other areas.
It actually ends up working out really well for the government because you actually end up getting, more taxes from increased labor force participation, from higher earnings, from the kids who have high quality early education throughout their lifetime, less costs in other areas like healthcare and criminal justice.
Anna Childs is the founder of the nonprofit Included San Diego.
It's a hot mess, right? And we live in a childcare desert where the cost of living continues to skyrocket. So the future feels bleak to me. I don't know what to say.
The mission of her organization is to expand early childhood education, especially for children with disabilities. She says childcare providers need better pay.
As a society, we have decided that folks that care for and work with children across the board deserve less than the rest of us. It's like the most problematic, sneaky, deeply held belief we have. We need a culture shift.
The only way to do that, she says, is for government funding to kick in. Tanya Thorne, KPBS News.
Last night, the Vista City Council held an emergency meeting on homelessness following a sudden shelter bed shortage. The situation highlighted the increased need for shelter beds in the city. The council suggested that the city declare the homeless crisis an emergency. Council member Dan O'Donnell says it should have been declared long ago.
I think that this was an emergency when our homelessness population rose by some 40% during the pandemic, so we should have done this way sooner. But in the moment that we're in right now, it is what it is, so we absolutely need to declare an emergency for it so we can get this done.
Mayor John Franklin says the emergency declaration will be docketed for next month's regular city council meeting. How California residents pay for electricity could change in 2026 as regulators consider an income-based flat fee system that is essentially a minimum bill. KPBS environment reporter Eric Anderson says as an administrative law judge is deciding how the state-mandated system will work.
The California legislature is responsible for an unprecedented change to electricity bills, but don't try to find the lawmaker responsible. The adjustments to the state's Public Utility Code and Assembly Bill 205 were made during state budget talks. A stroke of a pen, a legislative vote, and the governor's signature created a move toward income-based utility fees.
This was put in at the last minute. Nobody even knew it was happening. It was not debated on the floor of the Assembly, where it was supposedly passed. Of course, the governor signed it. We assume he knew what he was signing, and in particular that it's a very small clause in a very long bill, which is mostly about other issues.
But that small adjustment could have a massive impact on California's residents. Section 739.9 of the Utility Code calls on regulators to implement a monthly income-based flat fee for electricity customers. That fee cannot be avoided. The law says people who earn more money should pay more than people who earn less. But it doesn't spell out the specifics, leaving that to state regulators. Regulators call the change a mandate, but Faruqi isn't sold.
They said the commission may consider or should consider. They didn't mandate it. It's worth rereading.
In fact, the legislative language says the commission may adopt income-based flat fees. It does not say the commission should. Nevertheless, the California Public Utilities Commission has already requested and received 9 proposals. They came from consumer groups, environmentalists, the solar industry, and utilities. San Diego Gas and Electric rolled out their plan this past spring.
This is really about taking, our existing rates and really changing how electricity is priced for customers again, to make it simpler, to make it more predictable, and to really create that savings for lower-income customers.
SDG&E's unavoidable monthly fees range from $24 to $128, depending on income. The utility will also lower the per kilowatt cost of electricity, which the U.S. Energy Department says is currently the most expensive in the nation. It's roughly 47 cents.
Moving away from fossil fuels and more electricity in the homes and our vehicles, we really need to modernize the pricing structure to make sure that we can address affordability for the state while helping to meet the state's very, very aggressive climate goals.
Court filings show that SDG&E now suggests simplifying their plan. Customers who don't qualify for financial discounts would pay a roughly $73 a month fee. The utility would add the higher $128 a month fee for richer customers later. The California Public Utilities Commission has engaged an administrative law judge to sift through the proposals and adopt, revise, or blend them into a proposed decision.
This is a really significant policy debate.
Bernadette Del Chiaro represents the solar and storage industry. She wants an open and public process that involves the residents who are affected.
Energy is one of these issues that just affects people's pocketbooks in a way that kind of cuts through politics and any other kind of thing that's happening in our regions around politics and policy. And I think it's really important that the commission gain public trust on this one.
So far, it's looking like the sweeping changes will be made behind closed doors. The administrative law judge handling the case has already rejected requests for a public hearing and for additional evidence. That judge will issue a proposed decision in the spring, giving the public just over a month to comment before regulators vote on the plan ahead of a summer deadline. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
And tomorrow, a closer look at the proposals that will be the basis for the new flat fees.
I'm Amna Nawaz. Tonight on the NewsHour, what North Korea and Russia hope to achieve from a rare meeting of the two nations' leaders. That's coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
A federal judge in Texas once again ruled the Obama-era Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, also known as DACA, is unlawful. The program protects undocumented immigrants who were brought to the U.S. as children. The judge argued the rule violated the Administrative Procedure Act. The order doesn't impact current beneficiaries of the program. Last year, the Biden administration moved to codify the policy into a federal regulation. Inflation continued to rise last month. August hit the biggest monthly gain this year, according to the latest report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But there are some positive signs, and Ivan Rodriguez breaks down the numbers and what it could mean for the economy's future.
U.S. inflation accelerated in August for the second straight month. The main culprit, rising gas prices, which could mean problems going forward.
If high oil and gasoline prices are sustained, that's something that could spill over into prices for other goods and services.
Greg McBride, chief financial analyst with Bankrate, says while increases in some key areas are slowing down, we are not out of the woods.
Shelter costs are still increasing, but at a slower pace than what we had seen. And food prices have certainly moderated from the outsized pace of the past couple of years. So some signs of progress, but still some trouble spots we have to keep an eye on.
The rise in inflation is roughly in line with economists' expectations. On a month-to-month basis, prices rose 0.6% in August compared with the 0.2% gain in July. However, core inflation, which strips away food and energy prices, slowed to 4.3% from 4.7% on an annual basis, an indication the Federal Reserve's rate hikes are working to cool the economy. McBride says these numbers will likely keep the Fed on track for a pause in rate hikes.
But I also expect they're going to maintain this stance of, well, hey, we may have to raise interest rates again if need be.
Ivan Rodriguez, KPBS News.
A former NFL reporter is speaking out after filing a discrimination lawsuit against the league. Jim Trotter says he was let go by the league in March because he publicly challenged NFL for an alleged lack of diversity.
I challenge the NFL to live up to the standards that it says are important to it, that are core principles to the league in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for the last 2 years, I have been pointing out both internally and externally that in our newsroom, we did not have one black manager, we did not have one black copy editor, and we did not have one full-time black news assistant. And yet, we were covering a player population by the league's data that is 60 to 70% black.
Trotter is based in San Diego and covered the Chargers for nearly 20 years for the San Diego Union-Tribune before later working for the NFL. The NFL disputes Trotter's claim that he was let go due to racial discrimination, instead attributing his firing to a company-wide decision to lay off employees. While there may be not be cause for concern over a robot revolution just yet, the need for some regulation on artificial intelligence is mounting. Several tech industry leaders met with U.S. senators for the first time of 9 forums aimed at addressing concerns of just what AI can do and how it can be used safely. Karen Cava reports.
The future is here. Artificial intelligence is rapidly gaining traction, and now the U.S. government is playing catch up to put safeguards in place.
We're on the cusp of a new industrial revolution with enormous promise, but a panoply of perils.
Nearly a dozen industry leaders, along with several labor unions, civil rights, and entertainment industry representatives, convened on Capitol Hill Wednesday for a forum intended to chart a path toward comprehensive regulation. On the agenda, ways to harness the benefits of AI.
When it comes to fighting cancers, fighting long-term illnesses and so forth, I think AI has real opportunities.
Along with a number of growing concerns, including job protections, national security, copyright, and defending against doomsday scenarios.
What often keeps me up at night is the effect of AI potentially in displacing millions of American workers.
But Gizmodo AI reporter Thomas Germain says apocalyptic fears are just a distraction from problems AI is already creating, like racial bias and facial recognition software and new ways to spread misinformation.
If we're all worried about the robots taking over, then we're not going to be concerned over these, more boring, mundane issues.
Last week, a bipartisan framework for a European-style regulatory agency was introduced in the Senate, a move lauded by many in the tech industry.
Let's prioritize safety and security, which your framework does.
Though some critics are concerned regulation could stifle innovation, the hope is to get ahead of the tech and keep the industry in check. In Washington, I'm Karen Kafa.
Hackers are always looking for ways to deceive people online, to get them to open malware or reveal their passwords. And one way is to forward a bogus email from someone they claim to be. It's called spoofing. And KPBS SciTech reporter Thomas Fudge tells us what cybersecurity experts have learned about it.
Let's say you're checking your email and you get one from this address at the U.S. State Department. What does Antony Blinken want from me? Well, the email is a spoof. And although I'm sure the Washington Post wants me to subscribe, this email from them is also a spoof, created by computer scientists at UC San Diego.
So spoofing is basically you trying to send at someone else, right? Let's say I'm from UCSD, but I'm trying to send an email as state.gov. So that's what we call spoofing, where you're not really state.gov, but you're trying to convince someone else that you actually are.
Cybersecurity expert Alex Liu is lead author of a paper that shows how spoofed emails can be created with the automatic forwarding command. Instead of a direct transmission from the sender to recipient, forwarding relays an email from the sender to an intermediate server or account that then transmits the email to the recipient. Add to that complexity the fact that most companies don't manage their own email. They use Gmail or Outlook. The State Department, mentioned above, uses Outlook.
Having access to Outlook server is much easier than having access to state.gov, right? Because state.gov is not going to give a random guy like me access. But Outlook, on the other hand, is open for registration. Like you can register an Outlook account. I can register for an Outlook account.
And so can hackers and scammers who want to forge an online identity. Lou says spoofs can fool the target's email system because the fake email is coming from the same server that works for, in this case, the State Department.
This email is actually sent, is claiming to be from state.gov, and it's sent by an Outlook server. And state.gov does allow Outlook to send on its behalf, so it would consider the email trustworthy in this case.
There's not much an individual can do here aside from being suspicious when something looks wrong. Lou says protection is up to the third-party email company. He says some are doing a good job stopping fake emails, and some, like Outlook and iCloud, have got some work to do. My messages seeking comment from Microsoft and Apple were not addressed in time for this story. Thomas Fudge, KPBS News.
American Red Cross says it's facing a shortage as a result of recent weather disasters. They say emergency supplies have hit critically low levels after falling nearly 25% since early August. The nonprofit provides about 40% of U.S. blood and blood components to hospitals. The Red Cross needs to collect about 12,500 donations each day to meet patients' needs.
All right, time to look at our weather headlines here. Following a bit of a temperature roller coaster as temperatures slightly cooling, then warming up, then cooling again. Meanwhile, we'll watch some of those nighttime and then into the morning, some of those coastal low clouds that will extend well inland across much of the valley. Meanwhile, watching for some rough surf and some rip currents as we head throughout the end of the week and into our weekend. As for temperatures tonight, Oceanside, you're down to 62, San Diego 65, and Chula Vista will see temperatures into the lower 60s. Borrego Springs even dropping to 69, and Mount Laguna down to about 56. Into the day on Thursday we go, and as I mentioned, we'll kind of do this temperature roller coaster ride here, so temperatures going back up, a bit warmer, but staying dry as we head throughout our day Thursday. Sunshine on tap later on throughout the afternoon after some morning low clouds. Oceanside 76, San Diego 74. Borrego Springs near 100, and Mount Laguna, you stay at about 65. Much the same as we head into the day Friday as temperatures continue to stay warm. Any thunderstorms will stay well to the east. So a pretty nice day as we do wrap up the week on Friday. But taking you out a bit further, your extended 5-day outlook to the coast. Temperatures will stay warm and humid on Saturday, 77. And then we'll see some of those clouds clearing a bit on Sunday, 76. And by Monday, clouds and some sunshine, temperatures into the mid-70s. Inland we go, where we'll be at 80 degrees on Thursday. And then I mentioned temperatures will drop a bit as we head into Friday, Saturday through the weekend. And by next Monday, temperatures will only be into the low 70s, some clouds to start, but then followed by some sunshine. Your 5-day outlook for the mountains does keep mid-60s on tap for Thursday. Low 60s, though, as we head into the weekend. And then we'll keep those low 60s around with plenty of sunshine to start next week. Wrapping things up in the desert, where temperatures will be topping out to the upper 90s over the next couple of days, but then low 90s by the time we get to Monday. For KPBS News, I'm Ariella Scalise.
San Diego's MTS Transit Service says it's bringing back its free ride day. Today, the agency announced the date, Wednesday, October 4th. People will be able to ride MTS buses and trolleys at no cost. Same goes for Coaster and Sprinter trains covering parts of North County, and this comes during a time of elevated gas prices, with AAA putting the local average at $5.57 per gallon. And here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. NPR's Morning Edition is keeping an eye on Hurricane Lee. They'll have an update on the storm that's forecast to hit parts of New England in the days ahead. And KPBS Midday Edition has the weekend arts preview for events that are happening around San Diego. And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Have a great evening.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.